All right, well, hey, GVC fam, I am back. And while my family and I had a great time being away, we are glad to be back. And I'm certainly very much glad to be back here doing this with you. And this week we are going to continue our study in the Ten Commandments with question and answer 9. So let's dive in and read that together. Question: what does God require in the first, second, and third commandments? Answer: first, that we know and trust God as the only true and living God. Second, that we avoid all idolatry and do not worship God improperly. Third, that we treat God's name with fear and reverence, honoring also his word and works. Now, as I mentioned last week, the Ten Commandments seem to break into the two categories that Jesus used to summarize them, right? First, how we love and honor God specifically, and then how we love and honor our neighbor or fellow image bearers of God, which of course is loving and honoring God by extension. And the first three commandments, which we're talking about in this week's question and answer, seem to fit tidily into that first category, right? They are about how we directly relate to God. And so those first three commandments, just to reiterate: one true God, one only God, no other gods allowed, right? Second, because of this, don't make idols, don't worship other things, don't worship created things, but rather worship the creator of all things, right? Third, don't take his name in vain, or rather honor his name in all that you do. And so I think what the Catechism is getting at, in the way that it phrased these three commandments, is that there's more going on here than a simple you shall not type commandment. And so we're going to unpack them one by one and hopefully bring out a little bit from each one. So first, the first commandment, of course, is you shall have no other gods beside me. And this may seem obvious, I think, to some of you, maybe even to many of you, but as sinful human creatures, we elevate ourselves and our desires above God so naturally that we don't even really realize it, and we begin to worship ourselves and these things that we have propped up on pedestals in our lives by being consumed by them, right? Like by the way that we spend our time and our money, it's evident the things that our hearts desire most. But God says, know that I alone am God and you are not, right? And one of the recurring images in Scripture that I find so helpful and humbling, frankly, is this image that comes up repeatedly in Isaiah and Jeremiah, and the Apostle Paul picks up on it, most notably in Romans 9. And it's this image of the potter, a potter sitting at a pottery wheel, shaping and molding clay vessels to be used for whatever he purposes, really. And the image, the point of the image is that if God indeed created us, then he has absolute and full authority over us. He has absolute claim on our allegiances. So he gets to decide our purposes. He gets to decide what we live for. And he's decided that as his image bearers, we are to live for his glory. And so the first commandment then, reminds us in a very real way that we are clay and that he is the one potter. All right, secondly, don't make idols out of other created things, and no idol worship, no idolatry. And this one feels a little bit weird to us, I think, living in Western civilization. I mean, how many of you have seen idols or graven images used in religious worship, right? Little trinkets or statues or icons. I think most of us haven't been exposed to this because we live in such a secular culture where these things just aren't common. But at the time that the Ten Commandments were given in the ancient Near East, this was a very common practice, right? Little idols, little statues, little figurines made out of gold or metals or carved out of wood. And people would direct their prayers and their worship toward these objects as representatives of God or of other deities or pagan gods, right? And so while that idea may feel foreign to us, we make idols out of very different things here in our secular culture. We tend to elevate things like money, status, success, celebrity, right? And then when we do these things, we very quickly find ourselves living for and making these big sacrifices to achieve or to be near these things. And that is its own form of idol worship, of idolatry. To put this in perspective for some of you younger kids, kids, maybe you're a fan, like maybe you're really into hockey, maybe you're a big hockey fan, right? And maybe you live and breathe the sport. You daydream about it every spare second you have, maybe even in church. And you have your favorite players, and you've memorized all their stats, and you know their likes and their dislikes. You've watched their highlights over and over again, and you've spent hours trying to replicate their signature moves and play just like them. Now, of course, the point I'm making is not that it's a sin to be a hockey fan, because obviously that's not true. There's nothing wrong with admiring someone's God-given talent and skill, provided that you acknowledge that that's what it is, right? When you, the joy that you gain from watching them play the game, does it leave you in awe of them and their achievement, or does it leave you in awe of God and His creative genius on display in world-class athleticism? Wow, that's a hard word when you're not prepared for it. And the same questions could be asked of a favorite actor or musician or NASCAR driver or neurosurgeon or engineer or whatever it is that gets your blood pumping, right? And all we need to do really is ask ourselves, if we're not sure whether this applies to us, is, do we pursue God that way? Do we just want to be near Him whenever we can? Do our thoughts drift to how amazing He is? Do we want to memorize His words and the stories that tell about His awesome deeds? I think going through that exercise is helpful for us, because it shows us how prone we are to elevate other things above God and to take our God-given worship orientation as humans and focus it on things that aren't God. All right. Thirdly, we are commanded not to take His name in vain, right? And for me, and maybe this has been the experience of some of you, but for me growing up, I thought these words, "You shall not take the name of God in vain," or the Lord's name in vain. To me, I just thought that meant that you don't use God's name flippantly or disrespectfully as a swear word or an exclamation. And so naturally, then I thought that as long as I don't say those types of things, then I could just check this command off the list and I've got it nailed. However, as this catechism has pointed out, that there's a lot more to these commands than initially meets the eye. And that's because in Bible times, more so than now, though it is still certainly a thing in our day and age, but because we're so much more individualistic now, we tend to have our own individual reputations. But in Bible times, in the ancient Near East, when this command was given, your family name was very important. The name that you are given as a family name carried with it your reputation, your status in the community, all of these things. And so if a person was courageous and trustworthy and generous and kind, then they honored their family name, the name that had been given to them, bestowed upon them. As a representative of that family, they have done well. But if a person was a scoundrel, right, then their family name became sullied and diminished in value for the next generation. And that was a very, very bad thing to do. So when the Catechism says that we are to treat God's name with fear and reverence, honoring also his word and works, I think that at least part of what it's getting at is that we represent God in the world by our words and our actions. The people of God are identified with God. When he adopts us as his children, he gives us his name. And because of that, our words and our actions need to be in accord with his character. Otherwise, we bring dishonor to his name and damage his reputation in the world. And that is a grievous sin. All right, I think like with the last commandment, I think there's a helpful diagnostic question that we can ask ourselves here. And it's this: if you have any friends or family members or neighbors or classmates or teammates or co-workers who aren't Christian but who know that you are, spend some time, really think about the way that you speak and act around them. What does it convey to them about the God to whom you belong? All right, and I think that is a very helpful, but also a very humbling exercise, right? But I think this is all part of what it means to not take the name of the Lord in vain. All right, let's end it there for today. I'll see you back here next week.